left.
The newly released video shows Tiger Woods performing a series of sobriety tests.
Instructions, you understand?
Yeah.
Perfect.
The man behind the wheel didn't scream, didn't brake, didn't even look up, until the world flipped over him. The vehicle wasn't supposed to end up like that. One moment everything was moving normally, the next it was silent, tilted, and surrounded by strangers asking urgent questions. Someone had already pulled the driver out, but the confusion hadn't settled. Voices overlapped, details didn't line up, and something about the scene felt off. This is a real case and parts of it may be unsettling, so viewer discretion is advised. You're watching Fatal Files, where we break down real incidents using facts, timelines, and verified details. If you want case breakdowns, subscribe now and let us know where you're watching from. Because what happened here didn't end at the crash, and the real story was only just beginning. In the minutes that followed, questions turned into procedures, and procedures uncovered details no one expected. Stay with this case because every step reveals something new that changes how it all unfolds. It began as a routine drive. Tiger Woods was behind the wheel, moving through a familiar stretch of road with no immediate signs of danger. Traffic was light, conditions were stable, and nothing suggested that within seconds control would be lost. As he approached a section where another vehicle was preparing to turn, the timing narrowed. One vehicle slowed to enter a driveway. The other continued forward. The gap between them closed faster than expected. Witnesses would later describe the moment as sudden and unavoidable. There was no visible attempt to swerve, no clear braking pattern that stood out. The impact came quickly, striking at an angle that shifted the balance of the vehicle. The force redirected momentum, lifting one side before rolling it over. Metal twisted against the pavement, and the vehicle came to rest in a position no driver anticipates. A nearby driver, who had not seen the exact moment of impact but arrived almost immediately after, stopped without hesitation. Approaching the overturned vehicle, he noticed movement inside. Acting quickly, he opened what access he could and helped Woods climb out from the damaged frame. There was no panic, but the urgency was clear. The scene was still settling, and the full picture of what had just happened was only beginning to take shape. Within minutes, the first responding officers arrived and began assessing the situation. Their approach was methodical. The priority was safety, followed by immediate evaluation of the driver's condition. They asked direct questions, focusing on clarity and responsiveness. Was there any pain? Was he aware of what had just happened? Were there any injuries that needed urgent attention? Tiger Woods responded calmly. He indicated that he felt no pain and showed no obvious signs of serious injury. Officers observed his posture, his speech, and his ability to respond without delay. At that moment, nothing suggested a critical medical emergency, but protocol required confirmation. A medic team was requested to perform a more thorough check, ensuring that nothing had been overlooked in the initial assessment. At the same time, the scene itself had to be controlled. Traffic in both directions was slowed and then temporarily blocked to prevent further risk. Officers coordinated positions, directing vehicles away while keeping the area secure. A tow truck was called in with plans to stabilize and eventually move the overturned vehicle. Attention also shifted briefly to the contents inside. Woods confirmed that most of his personal items were accounted for, but there was concern about equipment still inside the vehicle, including golf clubs. Officers noted it, ensuring that recovery would be handled carefully once the vehicle was upright. The situation remained controlled, but it was far from resolved. As the scene stabilized, officers began separating witnesses to gather individual accounts. One of the key witnesses, the same individual who had helped pull Tiger Woods from the vehicle, described arriving just moments after the impact. He hadn't seen the exact collision, but he saw enough to understand the severity. The vehicle had already overturned, and the speed leading into that moment stood out in his mind. Another nearby account added more context. The turning vehicle had slowed, preparing to enter a driveway. At the same time, Woods' vehicle continued forward at a pace that, according to witnesses, did not appear to adjust. There was no clear indication of braking or evasive movement before the impact. That detail began to matter. Officers started piecing together the positions. One vehicle turning across a path, the other approaching with limited reaction time. On its own, that could still point to a standard traffic accident. But the consistency in witness descriptions began to raise questions. At the scene, officers also noted the lack of visible skid marks or signs of sudden braking. The angle of the overturned vehicle suggested that the force of impact had not been reduced significantly before contact. That observation didn't confirm anything on its own, but it added to the developing picture. What initially appeared to be a routine crash was starting to show gaps. And those gaps would require more than just surface-level answers. Once the immediate scene was under control, an investigating deputy approached Tiger Woods to document his account of the incident. The tone was straightforward and procedural. The goal was to establish a clear timeline based on the driver's own words. Woods remained composed as he responded to questions, providing direct answers without hesitation. When asked what had happened, he explained that his attention had briefly shifted. He admitted that he had been looking down at his phone, attempting to adjust something when the collision occurred. According to his statement, the impact followed almost immediately after that moment of distraction. The deputy clarified details to ensure accuracy. There were no signs of confusion in Woods' responses, and his account remained consistent during the questioning. Based on the information gathered from both the driver and the witnesses, the officer reached an initial conclusion. The incident was classified as a case of careless driving. A citation was issued, outlining the violation and its consequences. This included a financial penalty and points added to his driving record. The process was standard, and at that point, it appeared that the situation had been resolved within the scope of a traffic offense. Documentation was completed, and both parties were provided with the necessary information for insurance and follow-up procedures. From a procedural standpoint, the case seemed to be moving toward closure. But despite the citation being issued, the presence of multiple officers and the earlier observations at the scene left room for further evaluation. What had been concluded on paper did not fully settle every concern. Just as the situation appeared to be winding down, a new layer of investigation was introduced. A deputy assigned to conduct driving under the influence evaluations arrived at the scene. This step was not unusual in traffic incidents, especially when certain observations or uncertainties remained unresolved. However, it marked a clear shift in the direction of the case. The focus moved beyond the mechanics of the crash and into the condition of the driver at the time it occurred. The investigating deputy explained the purpose directly. While the initial report addressed the civil aspect of the collision, this phase would determine whether there were any factors that could elevate the situation into a criminal matter. Tiger Woods was informed of the process and asked to participate in a series of standard evaluations. These procedures are designed to assess a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely, regardless of whether alcohol or other substances are immediately suspected. The presence of a high-profile individual added another layer of scrutiny. Every step needed to be documented carefully, and every decision had to follow protocol. There was no room for assumption, only observation and procedure. What made this moment significant was not just the introduction of testing, but what it represented. The case was no longer limited to a simple traffic violation. It was now entering a phase where outcomes could carry far more serious implications. And as the evaluation began, the focus shifted from what had happened on the road to what might have been happening behind the wheel. The evaluation began with standard field sobriety procedures, designed to measure focus, coordination, and response accuracy. The first test focused on eye movement. Woods was instructed to follow a stimulus with his eyes while keeping his head still. The officer watched closely for consistency, tracking how smoothly his gaze followed the motion. This test is often used to detect impairment, but it also requires steady control and concentration. Next came the finger-to-nose exercise. Seated due to his physical condition, Woods was asked to alternate hands, bringing each index finger to the tip of his nose on command. The timing, accuracy, and control of each movement were observed. This was followed by coordination-based tasks involving hand movements, counting sequences, and pattern repetition. Each step was structured to evaluate divided attention, the ability to process instructions while performing physical actions. What complicated the evaluation was his medical history. Woods disclosed multiple back surgeries and significant leg injuries, including procedures that affected his mobility and balance. He explained that he had a limp and limitations in movement, which required the officer to adjust certain tests to a seated position. These conditions introduced variables that could influence performance independently of impairment. He also acknowledged taking medication earlier in the day, including ibuprofen, along with other prescribed substances he did not specify in detail. The timing and dosage were noted, but no immediate conclusions were drawn from that alone. The challenge for the officer was separating physical limitation from possible impairment. Each observed detail had to be considered within that context. The results did not exist in isolation. They had to be interpreted carefully, balancing medical reality with standardized evaluation criteria. And that balance would directly influence the final decision. After completing the evaluation, the officer reached a conclusion based on observed performance and overall assessment. Despite the acknowledged medical conditions, it was determined that Woods' ability to operate a vehicle may have been impaired at the time of the crash. He was placed under arrest for driving under the influence. Further investigation would clarify that no alcohol was detected. Attention shifted instead to the potential effects of prescription medication and how it may have influenced reaction time and awareness. Legally, impairment does not require alcohol, only a reduced capacity to drive safely. The case leaves open questions. Was the crash caused by distraction alone, or did underlying factors play a role? How much did physical limitations affect the evaluation? And would the outcome have been the same for someone without public recognition? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to Fatal Files for fact-based case breakdowns.